It's a whole lot of us, that's my family. Wanna go higher, turn up the tempo, increase the BPM, okay. Increase the BPM. Increase the BPM. Increase the BPM. Increase the BPM.
What's up, guys? This is Chris with U of L FCA. Welcome to our weekly podcast, In the Huddle, where we ask current or former athletes and coaches to come into this huddle, into this space, to really talk about their story, what God has done, what he's doing, what he's continuing to do. I'm super excited about today. One of my friends, former football player at the University of Louisville. Really look forward to catching up with him, Jason Spitz. Jason, thanks for coming on our podcast today.
Oh, thanks for allowing an old washed-up football player to participate in your podcast.
Well, I know better than that, man. From Ohio, man, I know a lot of people know you when your time that you played, and we'll talk about that professional career and even life after. But a lot of people may not know Jason Spitz growing up, man. So I'd love to even just go back to Ohio, man. Tell me what it was like to grow up in the
Well, it depends on which
home.
set of my friends you ask. I can't really claim Ohio. I was born there, but we moved down to Florida when I was 5. Now, all of my mother's family is still back there. I was really raised in Florida.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess everyone has a unique path to sports, to, I guess, eventually for me, professional football. I was just very fortunate. I had a foundation at the house that allowed me to do the things I did. I mean, my father was extremely strict about some things, first being grades, and then it didn't necessarily have to be sports, but you were expected to do something outside of academics, and anything you did do had to do to the best of your ability. He didn't care what it was. I grew up in a typical middle class-ish 2-parent household, great parents, and really allowed me. They set the example that I essentially used as my guiding principles, whether that be mirroring the word or their work ethic, that allowed me to succeed. My dad was a grinder, and that is the only way I was able to play football. I mean, growing up, I had an older brother, always the big guy, Big Al, and I was the runt of the litter, being the second son, which is surprising once you saw my peak height and weight at 6'4", 317 when I was playing pro football. But I always looked up to him. He set the tone, and I just wanted to be like Big Al. And I remember this distinctly, my father telling me, very harsh critic, but a realist, when I told him I wanted to play college football. He said, talk to me when you get to 250, because my freshman year, after the season was over with, I was 173 pounds. I don't know my brother weighed, but he was way more than 173 pounds. So I was like, all right, how do I get there? And this is kind of how I operate on a day-to-day basis. What can I do today to get better and improve for tomorrow? And you narrow your focus to the things you can actually control, things you can do. And for some reason, it set in at a very early age, the only way that I'm going to be successful, because I'm not physically gifted. I mean, you've seen some just absolute monsters in sports. And I always say there's 2 types of players. I know I'm rambling here. When it comes to pro football in particular, and it's based on the intonation of your voice. It's that dude plays football, and that dude plays football. I think it was in the second category. But spent so much time focusing on just improving, and then I woke up one day and ended up playing pro football. I mean, hell, pardon my language. My high school guidance counselor told me I should apply to some safety schools because I wasn't that big, and she didn't think I'd make it in football at the collegiate level. And I was like, okay. And like most arrogant football players, that when you're 18 years old, like, I'll show this lady. But I guess that's a long way of kind of talking about how I grew up. I mean, I think I was honestly very fortunate. For middle school coaches, people I was around, and really the foundation started at home for me. And I was able to leverage that. But from a coaching standpoint, I was just around great people who actually cared about their players and were trying to improve their lives, both on and off the field. I got lucky in middle school, although for unfortunate reasons, my dad was an entrepreneur, and we had some highs and lows. We were at a really downtime in our lives. Had to switch schools, but fortunately we're in a decent area, had a decent football program, great coaches. But where we lived, they actually split up the school district. So I didn't even go to the same school as my brother, but got lucky. Another group of coaches cared about the kids, taught the game the way it should be taught, and have expectations out of the players to eventually drive them to expect it out of themselves. So I got lucky across the board, all coaching staffs, maybe one team in the NFL. That staff didn't last long, is for a good reason. But I was just always fortunate.
Was it always football? Did you play any other sports growing up?
I did because I was forced to. I'm not very. I tell people when people say you're a pro athlete, I was like, athlete's a loose term. I was very good at operating in the phone booth that is offensive line play. If I got outside of that, and I said, if I'm ever running more than 5-10 yards, something's going really good or really bad. In either case, I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. So I have no delusions of how athletic I was. I mean,
Well, you're so humble, okay, and I know that. I mean, you're a hungry dude that's very ambitious, but you're also very humble, and we'll get to a lot of that here shortly. But when did you realize, like, okay, recruiting looks a lot different now than
I
what
couldn't
it
even
did.
imagine.
Yeah,
and
so
I don't
what?
think I mentally could have. I say that, but go. Sorry, finish your
No, it's just
question.
like when did you realize? Okay, I think I can maybe get. I'm maybe going somewhere with this.
At the collegiate level, probably by. I mean, every kid thinks they're going to play on Sundays, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have that dream, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? You should always aspire to be the best of your profession or to reach the top level. I mean, that's why you play pickup games in the neighborhood, in the backyard, to imagine yourself. Well, of course, no one wants to play offensive line, but throwing that game-winning touchdown. But I guess blocking for it's equally as satisfying. But you started getting recruited. I mean, I think my freshman year, I was 173 pounds as an offensive lineman. I mean, I ran track in middle school. I did some things, so I had some base athletic capabilities, but really through this just sheer persistence and a little bit of grit, I kept just building on the foundation. So I went from 173 my freshman year, 225 my sophomore year, somewhere around 250-ish by my junior year. Started getting the letters. I mean, people probably get emails now, but a lot of letters started coming into the house. And by my junior year, I mean, my first high school, I went to Wolfson High School. Great coaches, just terrible football program. We had some issues. They changed staff year to year. But I actually got my brother's high school coach, came over to coach, and they said, listen, you maybe have a future. You may want to contemplate, if you can, going to a different school. By my junior year, I went to what was in Louisville the equivalent of like a KCD, but with like a Trinity or CNX type football program. Yeah. So they kind of compiled a group of misfits across the city to play football. Not that we recruited and got in trouble for it 2 years later, but stellar program underneath Corky Rogers, who I think is like the winningest high school coach in the state of Florida in history. So I got lucky. And really took his teachings and just ingrained it in my DNA. And it's a saying I live by. And he always used to ask, say, well, you know what the best days to work are? And he goes, days that end in Y. Because here's what I can promise you. You're getting better, you're getting worse.
Yeah.
He's like, there is no staying the same, because someone somewhere in this country that's fighting for the same positions you are is doing the work they need to get ahead. Or they're just more talented than you. In either case, if you haven't done something today to get better, you're wasting your time. So got lucky with him, got recruited to several places. I mean, at the time for U of L, Scott Lenahan was the offensive coordinator. John L. Smith was the head coach. And then Art Valero was my offensive line coach. 3 stellar human beings, 3 great football coaches. Every single one of them went on to coach at bigger programs and or in the NFL. Obviously, Scott having the longest tenure in the NFL. So I saw that they had something. And at the time, I think they were ranked in the top 25. And then I also, 2 of my high school buddies were being offered by U of L. So that didn't hurt with the recruiting process to get me to make the jump to Louisville versus what my father's.
So what was it with Louisville? So why did you choose Louisville?
I liked the coaches and I wanted to play early. Like I didn't really care about the pedigree. Not that we didn't have a pedigree in the program, but I just wanted to play football. I didn't give a darn about SEC. I didn't care about conference. I just wanted to play ball and go to a place where I thought I would be able to flourish. You know, Louisville's a nice little city, but my other options were I hit Auburn and South Carolina when Lou Holtz was a coach, and had my dad had his way, that's where I would have went.
Oh, yeah.
And I was going to play D tackle at Kansas State. And there's a few other offers. So decent programs. I think Auburn was, maybe top 10 country time. South Carolina was somewhere in and around there. And I guess I'm stubborn-headed as to why I didn't go to South Carolina, because I went on my trip. My dad was in love with Lou Holtz.
Well, he's easy to love.
Oh, yeah, but, I mean, he remembers Lou from his Notre Dame days. And I was very deliberate about it. Listen, this is the first and only time I'm going to go through this process. I want to see what my options are. And I'm going to go on all my visits before I make a decision. So I get there Friday, and they asked if I was ready to commit. I was like, I was up front with you guys that, I wanted to take all my visits, and then I'd make a decision. And I'd already been to U of L with my 2 buddies. And we spent the entire weekend with the O-line coach and Lou. And then, come Sunday, we sit down for lunch before we depart and go back to Jacksonville. And be like, well, have you seen enough? Are you ready to commit? I'm like, you know what? It's a great program. I like what you guys have going on here. I was like, but I want to be thorough in this. I'm going to take the remainder of my visits. And they go, we can respect that, but we can't promise we'll hold the scholarship. And immediately I go, I'm gonna make it real easy for you then. Don't hold it. I'm not coming here. I got up, I left. My old man didn't talk to me for a month. Lou called my house. The O-line coach called my house, and my high school coach, I think almost every day. To see how they resurrect the relationship. I was like, it's burnt. I'm one of those guys, I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. And I expect the same out of everyone I deal with. Otherwise, I don't have much time for you. So that was that. And then shortly after, Louisville felt right. I had that comfort of having a few folks I knew, knowing it's a big transition. I mean, everyone thinks they got the whole world figured out at 18 years old. I can promise you don't. I mean, I'm 42 now. I'm still figuring some stuff out.
Yeah.
I'm settled in my ways, stubbornly and unfortunately. Especially for my wife, but at this point. But I'm still just trying to figure out now what's the best thing to do for the kids. That's really the driving force. I think I got that. But anyways, that's how I end up at U of L. I like to visit. 2 buddies, 2 familiar faces were going to be there. And I thought it was the best school to play early and accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish. And so shortly after turning down the South Carolina opportunity, I terminated the rest of my visits. I was like, I don't need to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
And just move forward.
Well, you talked about your dad growing up and just being strict on things and pressing you to be the best that you could possibly be, and when you look back at that, we're almost even attracted to that. I mean, I like that. I love that. I was pushed the same way. And you go looking for that. And so when you come to Louisville, you get some of that in that hard coaching that some people would kind of like, especially nowadays, kind of like push that, but some people hunger for that.
I don't know. I feel like every generation thinks the next generation's entitled, but I don't feel like people are as receptive to the hard coaching as they once were. Like Bobby. I love Bobby. And people are like, how'd you play for Bobby? I was like, easy, you just don't mess up. You had no problems with him. But my high school coach had a similar approach to the game as Bobby did. It was perfect or it was garbage.
Yeah.
And you get that ingrained in your approach, your mentality, to where you start holding yourself more accountable than your coach. And then once you're able to make that pivot in anything, whether it be sports or your profession you choose to pursue, once you are your harshest critic and focus on the things you can improve, whereas I think kids these days focus on the things they did well, like my son. I coached him in flag football. I'm coaching him again in flag football this year. He would brag about the 2 or 3 things he did really well and completely forget or disregard the 25 things he didn't do well. So I'm working on him. I'll eventually grind it into him. But yeah, I was attracted to that style of coaching because that worked for me. I don't mind. And it was a change when you go from college under Petrino to like Mike McCarthy. I had his first year as head coach at Green Bay. It is a different game in the NFL than college. I don't want to say you're equals, but there's a level of professionalism across the board where there's no more yelling and screaming, although our offensive line coach would yell and scream because he's a former offensive lineman. But the expectation is set to a level where if you don't expect it out of yourself, you're probably not going to last very long.
Yeah, well, you guys, and thinking back to your all's teams, man, you guys, you had a lot of talent, but you also had, you had a desire to be the best, and probably I would argue, probably some of the best teams that ever came through the University of Louisville, especially in your position. I mean, they had all the skill positions. I mean, but that offensive line, by far, in my opinion, was the best offensive line to ever come through.
I'd agree with that statement 100%. I mean, there's always talented kids. I mean, if you look across the years, I think it started with the core group or the foundational group that started before I came in with like, Pageant and Griv and those guys and Darzinski. Some of the folks I kind of say, okay, this is how things are done. And I think it was maybe driven by Art and John L. Just there was a culture and an expectation, and this is pre-NIL, this is pre-portal. Essentially, you made a commitment, you were stuck for a period of time unless you wanted to go down to like 1AA, 2A. So you didn't have the option. Because I don't know what I would have done. When John L. would have left, I can almost with 100% certainty told you I would have been gone too. I'd have been going to the next highest bidder because at that point I was playing well. I would have been marketable. So maybe I'm glad. I'm also glad I didn't get any money come to college because I remember my freshman year I got a Pell Grant check. It was only for a few $1,000s. I thought I was Bill Gates. I'm the richest man alive. So I don't know what offensive linemen get these days. I know what the top tier kids get, but I was like, maybe I wouldn't be able to handle this. Maybe it's better I played when I played. But can't really take credit for that group of folks. I mean, we just got lucky. I mean, we had a good core group of older guys. And we had a lot of young players that were starting. Me, Travis, Will kind of came in, and then Kurt and Renardo. So we had some young kids that were really talented, backed up by some other really talented kids. And then, Eric comes on as a freshman because Renardo got hurt that year. And I was supposed to play center, moved back to guard, and that was his freshman year. And I think success attracts talent. That's why now you can pay kids, right? You can build out a roster on an annual basis like an NFL team without the long-term commitment. But why Alabama or these big programs are successful is because people want to be attached to winners. So if you have some success, which we did, I think while I was there, we were top 5 offensively, if not top 1 in most of the categories. So we were very successful in offense. So if you're an offensive player, it's a great place to come, especially if you're overlooked by some of the bigger programs. Louisville was a great place to come. Louisville's a great city. It has most of the benefits of a large city, few of the trappings. We were very successful athletically, and we were the only show in town, right? There's no competition. So it allowed you to come here and be successful. So that they kind of set up the environment to allow us to do what we did, and got lucky because we had an amalgamation of folks that were like-minded, and I think all offensive linemen across all levels are the same type of dude. Blue collar, because it's a thankless position. It requires a lot of work, and people always talk about mostly NFL. And I was like, being an NFL offensive lineman is no different than being like a plumber or a contractor. It's very much blue collar work, with the exception of you get paid a little bit more, and what you do is on TV. Yeah. But it's a blue collar job, no question about it.
I mean, my introduction to college athletics, as far as from an FCA standpoint, I remember Coach Petrino asking me to do a chapel. And he said, you got 8 minutes, don't go over 8 minutes. and I remember the first one, he said, I said, Coach, are you asking me to do all of them or just this one? And he sits there for a minute and he says, well, why don't you do the first one and I'll let you know after you do it? And it's like, oh my goodness. And I love that. I love that kind of on the spot. But I remember sitting down with that group of guys that you mentioned earlier. Like chapel, for people that don't know, it's different at different places. But during that time, team meal, everyone was there and no one was allowed to talk. And I'm here with all of you guys, and all you hear are like these steak knives hitting. And you guys would take this steak and cut and put all the fat in this little bowl. I'm sitting here just blown away. And then Coach would nod to me. Then I go up, I get my 8 minutes. I was just blown away by how welcoming, but yet how attentive all you guys were during all of those chapels. And you build like a friendship. And I think that's where, from my standpoint, building a relationship with guys is not those 8 minutes. It's coming to practices. It's going to games. It's when time gets tough, you have a place and somebody can go. How would you, being a former player, coach people that are watching this? What is the role of an FCA chaplain, or my road to you?
I think we all develop or establish guiding principles in life. And where's a better starting place than through the Word? Because given our schedules, it's not always the easiest thing to do, especially after a game, to get up and go to church on a Sunday. And then we were all transplants, so you didn't have a resident church. So having that offering is paramount for your religious development through school. And then it's always nice to it's also humbling, right? Because in the grand scheme of eternity and the afterlife and the Lord, what you do in those 4 years at school it's irrelevant into the grand scheme of things. But using those principles to help, I think it's 2 Timothy 1:7, right? We don't have a spirit of timidity, but of discipline, something along those lines. But I think it's helpful to kind of reconnect, especially, and I think it helps, I don't want to say de-risk, but listening to the Word the night before the game kind of stabilizes you, right? You get worked up, you get nervous. I don't care how good you are, you always get nervous the next day. So it kind of brings you back down to ground, and then helps you understand what's truly important in this life. And with the guys, what was, I think, unique, and why most teams or companies are successful, because you get like-minded individuals in the same place trying to achieve the same goal. And as long as they all care the same way the next guy does, we're going to get there. We're going to have ups and downs, just like in life. But we have a team or a teammate to help you get through that. And that's why the chaplains are so important, because there's stuff that happens, of course, your college life. You need someone to act as a sounding board.
Oh, yeah.
Outside of a football setting. So it's almost, it's chaplain, preacher, whatever you want to call it, but as a counselor. There's stuff that pops up in life. Kids make mistakes. You're in a situation you're uncomfortable with and you don't want to go to your coach about, because it may or may not impact your play. Because to an extent, they cared, some more than others, but they just want to make sure you can play football. And you needed that confidant you could go to. And this is whether it be you or one of the other teammates. I knew I had my core group of guys. If I had something I was dealing with and I was unsure of what to do, I knew who I could go to, no questions. Like, I know if I was stuck on the road at 2 a.m., then I'd text you. Now, I'm willing to bet you're going to show up.
100%.
That's the kind of individuals you want to surround yourself with, and that's the type of people we had at U of L at the time.
Yeah, and it continues to do that. That's what I'm really starting to even appreciate about the role that I have here. I started with the football team in 2004, and so years later, still have a friendship with that, and that's something that I really appreciate, and it continues. If the text came now, I'm still doing it. So you leave football. Football was very successful. I mean, you have a great career. The team has a great time and a great success while you're there. You're drafted 3rd round to the Packers.
Yep.
Win a Super Bowl.
Yep.
I mean, something that you never dreamed about, being 170 pounds in high school.
I was dreaming about it. I just didn't know how I was going to get there. I mean, in college in particular, people used to ask what my backup plan was. Well, my backup plan is the NFL, because you don't know if you're going to get there, and you're a fool if you think you can, because the odds are stacked against you. And the biggest fallacy about kids is just getting there. Getting into the NFL is the easiest part. Staying in there is the hardest part.
And that's what people need to hear today.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know, there's so many things I'd love to cover about that approach, and with NIL money, and we could spend an hour talking about that and how to protect kids. And because some of these kids, that's the most money they're ever going to see or make playing football. Because for every one of you, there's 50 guys behind you. Maybe they're not as talented, but for the most part, they are. And then why guys don't make it, it's maybe the right or the wrong system. You don't get a lucky break. I mean, I look at some of the guys. I look at Mark Tauscher. I played next to for years, tackle. He was a walk-on at Wisconsin. I think he was like the last draft pick for Green Bay. Now, he's a good player, don't get me wrong. But had someone not gotten hurt, he never would have got a chance to start in a football game, and he never relinquished the spot. So there's luck involved. There's the right situation, right staff. If you're in a terrible team, there's turnover, and you were drafted by the previous staff, you're not their guy. So then if you're not a just absolute surefire day one starter, you may be looking for a job at some point, because they're going to bring in their guys because you weren't part of the plan.
No, but you had that mindset going in. I mean, from you were just you're super intelligent anyway, and I mean that's just you're gifted in that area. But you're very disciplined. Like money was never, you didn't have to have it. You're the same guy that could wear the same stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I joke. It's good to have deep pockets and short arms, and I get made fun of. I mean, if with few exceptions, if Costco doesn't sell it, I probably don't need it. But I said I grew up in a middle class, but my dad was an entrepreneur, so they were good times. But I remember the hard times more than I remember the good times. And the last thing I wanted to do, and I don't know why I had this foresight, but I knew I would eventually get married. I knew I would eventually have children, and I never wanted to put my future family in a position that I remember as being very challenging for my parents in those skinny years. The year where we had to move out because we were losing the house. The years where that Christmas tree was pretty skinny. And I could see the disappointment in my parents' eyes, and never wanted to put my kids through that. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. But I knew my goals were bigger than myself. I have a very specific goal I'd like to reach for my children, so I can allow them the opportunity to pursue their passions and not have to pursue a paycheck the same way I have. I enjoy what I do, which is fortunate because some people don't. I like it, but I have no need for material items. I have a house that's fine. Could I have a bigger house? Absolutely. I got a 8-year-old, 9-year-old car. That was not a great car when I bought it. I don't need those things. Now, eventually, my wife I'll pass. She can spend it all for all I care, as long as my kids are taking it. So I'm on a path of certainty. I know if I follow the path that I've set out for myself with 100% certainty, my kids will never have to worry about school. They'll never have to worry about having a roof over their head. And frankly speaking, they'll probably never have to worry about retiring because I've set them up to be successful. That's the design. The difficulty is ignoring those daily distractions that pop up that prevent me from achieving the goal. That's the key, and it's an everyday active decision. And I'm combating with my significant other too, because she knows relatively where we are to her peer sets. They all got nicer cars, they all have bigger houses, and none of them got the money I got. So I was like, we don't need that stuff. I was like, so my joy comes in knowing that I can set up my kids for success, and because the only thing I really get joy out of in life is hanging out with them. It's simple.
Yeah, well, you've always had a plan, and even plan B, plan C, and working that plan and being disciplined enough to work the plan. And I've watched you do that. I not only just watched you do that, I've watched you do that consistently. When you look at Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's those guys that just consistently did the simple things the right way, continuously.
Yeah.
And you've done that. Football teaches a lot of life lessons, and there's so many people, but you're being one of them that you carried those football lessons over into life.
Yeah,
everyday life.
It's such a challenge. I mean, sports in particular, the amount of work you have to put in to just get just this incremental improvement, and you don't see it, but over a long period of time, it stacks up, and one mistake can throw it all away. I liken it to pushing a boulder up a hill. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to just gain that 1 inch. And if you slip, you get hurt, you get distracted, you got to start over. If you even have the opportunity to start over. So that's how I kind of approach it is.
Well, one thing, even with adversity, football teaches you how to handle adversity, but you can never be completely ready for what hits, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least talk to you and ask, because you mentioned your dad earlier, just the impact and the influence of your mom and your dad. And, as time went on, I think you were in the NFL maybe a few years when the passing of your father.
Yeah. So it was the passing of my father happened, unfortunately, the year I retired. My dad had gotten into some trouble. It was a real challenging time in my life. So when my dad did some things in business and got in trouble, particularly with the law. So that was a weird, and to the point where the team noticed. So when you get to the NFL, I mean, they have people constantly doing checks on not only you to see if people are getting arrested, but what's going on with your family. So I guess I saw a Google search on. My dad was a little bit of trouble and was potentially looking at serving time. I know I should probably laugh about that. And I was preparing for what was to come with that, and was going home for Thanksgiving. It was not going to be a pleasant trip, and probably why I don't like Thanksgiving, because we need to have some real hard discussions about what happens to Mom. They were in real financial troubles. So we were trying to get that all figured out. Only for them to come home, and what my dad they thought he had a stroke. Turns out he had tumors in his brain that were kind of throwing everything off. He had metastatic melanoma, and spent a lot of time going back and forth managing that. And so, fortunately, or unfortunately, the legal troubles went away, but because he was dying. Yeah. But thank God my mom just had such a strong constitution and was just a rock through the whole thing. It couldn't have been easy. But I was, fortunately, when they needed help, I was able to provide help and got them through that. But that was difficult. It was a difficult time in my life because ultimately I was trying to, I just got out of the NFL earlier than I wanted to, as it happens to everyone, primarily driven by injuries. And was trying to just focus on myself and what I was going to do next. And that caused a distraction that kind of push out my horizon. But I did all the things right that I was supposed to do right. Didn't need money, didn't have to look for work, so it was going to be very deliberate about what I pursued next. I just had to take care of what I needed to take care of, when I needed to take care of it, and that meant helping out with my father, helping out with my mother. And then when we got through that, I kind of reset my clock to start pursuing what it is I was going to do next with my life.
Talk about it, just even your relation. You got to be a great, talented, driven individual to make the NFL, but you also have to have a strong wife if you're married, somebody that's not selfish but selfless.
Yep.
You know, you guys have known each other a long time. I mean, you all met in college.
Yep.
You know, you got a great wife.
Yeah, she says I do. Just kidding if you watch this. But no, I mean, she's great. She's definitely not, she's not a coach's wife, I'll tell you that much. She'll admit that. But yeah, I mean, it is a unique path that most players walk down. There's a lot of distractions. It presents unique challenges. There's obviously a ton of benefits. But just like as my mother was to my father, I mean, Sam's my rock, right? She's my confidant. She's my best friend. And I know no matter what, as long as we are together, we can get through anything.
What's having kids? Obviously, you can see through a guy's eyes to the heart of his children. Tell me, what is being a father taught you?
The world becomes a very scary place when you have kids. Most ball players are alpha types, but I didn't really become concerned about the future or scared of the world until I had kids. And everything becomes about, so there's this evolution in life where for the first however many years before you meet that person, life's all about you. And then you dies, and it's about us. And then you guys make that next jump where you have kids, and then us dies, and it becomes about them. Eventually it gets back to us. And you try to make it as much about us, but so the focus becomes on your children. And you can never predict, no matter how good, I mean, you've seen this probably more than anybody. Challenging upbringings, kids still turn out right. Great home life, kid still has challenges. So you never know how it's going to all shake out. So my only concern is, am I doing what I need to do for my kids to ensure that they're successful? Not because I forced it, not because I'm doing it for them, but because I'm educating them and teaching them or setting the example to where they can do it on their own. That was the one thing. There's too much helicopter parenting these days. We're too forward integrated into their day-to-day lives. Like my wife gets daily updates on their homework, their grades. My parents got one report card. Never talked to the teachers during the year, did not care. But the expectation was you were doing what you needed to do to get it done. And you were going to answer for it if the report card was not where it needed to be. Not that grades are all the end-all, be-all. But I said, so we got to let them fail and figure it out on their own. I'm going to be there to support some sort of a safety net. But if they don't figure it out on their own, they're never going to figure it out.
Yeah. As you kind of start to round home with this, just, I've had great conversations with you. I've watched you, grow, whether that's through your collegiate time. You're not one that needed a lot of attention at all. You were just driven that way. But friendship had that. And I've watched you just grow through that of being a friend, supporter of FCA, of what we're doing. Talk whether it's through your wedding or through the death of your father. What is faith? How has faith worked in your life? I don't know if that was it brought up when you were younger? Was it even part of your life? Or
that was primarily driven by my mother, right? I think growing up in a church, or at least having a foundation in faith, was important to her. Because my father was an atheist, which is a weird dynamic. My father was a complicated human being. You haven't figured that out. But it goes back to those guiding principles, right? But where else are you going to get the appropriate guiding principles than through the Word? So I've always been tied to it in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things my wife and I have decided, we've now joined the Catholic school system. The kids go to St. Albert, because it's important to us they're brought up through the Word to build that foundation, to allow them to establish the same guiding principles that kind of drive us through life. Again, that it's not so much for my own doing, it's also through to make sure I'm, again, going back doing the things I know I need to do to help my kids be successful.
Yeah. Well, man, I want to thank you for coming on, man. I want to thank you for, it's one thing to see an athlete come through the program, but then once they leave the program, they're very successful, Super Bowl champion, a stellar career as a professional, very successful in what you do now. You're going to be successful at anything that you do, but as for my role, watching these younger guys grow up into the men and the husband and the people that they are, it's a joy. So thanks for your friendship. Thanks for your support, you and Sam and with FCA. And man, I just want to thank you. Thank you for what you do. And I know you're a humble guy. You want to move on to something else, but I want to take the time to give you some flowers on that anyway, man, and say thanks. Thanks for that.
I appreciate you and everything you do and being that person I could reach out to when I need to reach out.
I want to ask you one more question and leaving. It's not going to be a long one, but it's going to be like a rapid fire. Toughest coach you ever played for?
Bobby. No question. Bobby was the toughest and this is weird, the easiest. He knew exactly what he wanted. Perfection. And it got to the point he didn't even have to start yelling. You're already yelling yourself. And then it got to I was fortunate because I was good enough. Those butt chewings were few and far between, but he was by far probably the toughest. Second to that, my high school head coach, Corky. After that, it got easy. So if I wasn't getting yelled at, something felt off. When I jumped into the real workforce, I'm like, why is nobody yelling? Can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, best college, best team at the University of Louisville you played for?
Probably the best team we had at U of L was my junior year. We played the Liberty Bowl. That year was an absolute shootout with Boise State at the end of the season. Offensive line got the MVP of the game, by the way. But we had that was before I ended up, it was junior year, before Rabbit team left, and really that core group of guys started to break up. But it was me, Rabbitine, and Travis were the old guys in the group. Had just a great group of guys. We all hung out, and we were just in it together. But I think that was our best. Stephon was our quarterback. Braum was coming in to kind of his own at the time. But that's probably the most talented. And had we not lost to Miami that year, I could see the ball hitting Kerry Rhodes in the chest.
Oh, I know.
We would have gone undefeated and probably had a chance pre-playoff era to go to the big show. Yeah. And think we would have every justification given how good our offense was. Yeah. Our offense was. And our defense, we had some tremendous talent there as well. Probably our only legitimate shot of going to the title game was that year. And we missed out.
Hardest got a block?
Everybody you ever faced in the NFL.
I figured that answer.
No, the toughest opponent, Bryant Young, Hall of Fame. I think he's in Hall of Fame. Defensive tackle for the 49ers. I played him as a rookie, and it was a bring your lunch pail to work kind of day. And had a good game against him, and he retired after that year and could not figure out why. Wow. He was just an absolute monster. He was big. He was quick. And I think culture early. The flip side of that, we played the Raiders and Warren Sapp. I grew up in Florida. Tampa Bay was, better than the Jaguars. And I played for the Jaguars eventually. But so I looked up to him. I was a D tackle, and he had played too long. And I was excited when I was same year. I got a holding call against him because we were beating them pretty good, and it was quiet in the stadium. and he was listening to Favre call the plays, and he knew exactly. He was savvy. Obviously, he's late in his career, but he just didn't have the physical ability that he did. And I got a holding call because he jumped outside on outside zone. I tugged him a little bit. He's like, rookie, that SHIT may have worked at Louisville. It ain't work up here.
Oh,
I was like, oh man, he knows where I went to school.
Yes. Oh yeah, he did his
was
homework on you, man.
Yeah.
No doubt. Well, man, this has been fun. This is a joy to me. Thanks for taking the time to do that because I know you've been in a lot of places, but thanks for the time doing it. Means a lot.
Appreciate
All
having
right,
me.
thanks, buddy.